Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes football webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper along with Tribune football beat writer David Morrison. David, Missouri coming off a 21-14 victory over Arkansas to win the SEC East title for the second year in a row. They will play Alabama in the SEC championship game. So, the Arkansas game. Black Friday, Arkansas comes in a slight favorite over Missouri. For the first half, looks like they should be a heavy favorite over Missouri. I felt like they really sort of dominated the game, and Missouri was probably a little bit fortunate to only be trailing 14-6 when they make a 50-yard field goal right at the halftime buzzer. Then entering the fourth quarter, still down 14-6 when they put together two very long drives, one 98 yards, mostly all passing, and then an 85-yard drive, 100% running, and put the game away with a fumble recovery after that. Win 21-14. What do you think was the key, or what changed maybe for them offensively to put those two long drives together when previously they were kind of getting dominated up front?
Yeah, well, I mean, usually when we ask the coaches this, they say, execution, and you kind of roll your eyes because you assume that they just don't feel like explaining things to you, but it really
Or they don't know themselves.
Or they don't know themselves, but it really seemed like execution against Arkansas. I mean, they weren't running different plays per se than they were running in the first half. What was happening was Maty Mauk was getting more time and space to breathe in the pocket, and receivers were getting open quicker, and the running, the holes were bigger in the run game, and so, I guess that all boils down to execution, and, they did make a switch at halftime. They brought out Taylor Chappell, who Gary Pinkel said had a hyperextended elbow, but he was, getting beat fairly soundly by Trey Flowers off the edge in the first half, and so they put Connor McGovern there, and all of a sudden, they don't have to worry about Trey Flowers as much. They move in Mitch Hall to right guard, and he, holds his water and does a good job there, and things just start going right for him. And then, they didn't really pace Arkansas, but what they did was they would get to the line quick and do the thing where they go up to the line and then Maty Mauk says easy, easy, easy and looks over and gets the play. But I think that still served to confuse Arkansas a little bit just because they couldn't sub personnel out and they couldn't kind of adjust their fronts and anything to what Missouri was doing. And Missouri only kind of goes to that pace when they're having success offensively. You can't really run it off of a 4-yard loss on a run or anything like that. So I think that helped out. I think the switch from Chappell, by no means were the struggles in the first half all Taylor Chappell's fault. I mean, you can't pin that.
They were getting beat a lot of spots.
Yeah, they were getting beat everywhere. But I think the switch helped. Connor McGovern was really good at right tackle, as he was earlier in the season, and Mitch Hall was good at right guard. So I just think it was kind of a combination of, the switch in the offensive line and the fact that they were just better than they were in the first half, across that front.
Well, one way they executed better was they actually started catching his passes. I thought he was pretty accurate the whole game, but they were dropping him in the first. Jimmy Hunt had a really rough first half, and then he made some nice catches in the second half. I think really that on 3rd and 7, the pass to Jimmy Hunt for 44 yards changed the whole game. I think if that slips off his fingers, Missouri maybe doesn't win the game.
And it almost did.
He bobbled
juggled it twice before he got it.
I think that game could have gone either way, and that play was sort of switched the whole thing. But it was just night and day the size of holes those guys were getting, though, in that final drive where they go down and score compared to what it had been the whole game up to that point. So, obviously, another fourth quarter victory for Missouri. If you looked at what Missouri was doing in the middle of the season compared to what they've done here at the end, Maty Mauk's really picked up his game. Maybe more of what you thought he was going to be this season, he has really become here at the end of the season. To you, what maybe is the biggest difference between, that real funk he was in the middle to what he's doing now?
He seems more confident and more decisive almost. Like, it seems as if in the middle of the season, he would kind of waffle a little bit. He would try to extend plays to the sideline and wait for something to open up, whereas now it seems as if he's not thrown to that first read, he's getting out of the pocket and scrambling, or he's trying to fit it into maybe a second read that's a dump down, that's an easier pass for him than trying to extend it to the sideline and make a 40-yard pass downfield happen, things like that. And I think it all stems with he's more comfortable with the people around him right now. It's seen, especially after the Indiana game, when they put up good numbers offensively, but the offensive line was letting blitzers through every other play. It seemed like he almost got a little gun shy behind that line for the next 3 or 4 weeks, and that led to a lot of scrambling with no effect, and that led to things like that. And then as that was happening, the receivers were going through injuries. They weren't getting open as easily. They were dropping passes. And so I think at that point, he just kind of lost confidence in the 10 people around him. And I think that's slowly been regained between those two groups over the past 3 or 4 weeks, where Maty Mauk feels more comfortable in the pocket now, and he feels more confident that if he lays a ball out there for Jimmy Hunt, he's going to catch it, even though he might have dropped him in the past. I think another important play in that first half was the play immediately after Jimmy Hunt dropped that long pass on the sideline. Mauk went back to him to convert a 3rd and 11, and that showed that he's not going to shy away from a guy who basically just burned him because he has that confidence in him. So I just think it's a matter of being more poised almost, and knowing that he doesn't have to do it all by himself, and knowing that the 10 guys around him kind of have his back, whereas at the middle point of the season, maybe he was a little iffy on that point.
Yeah. I would say, for most college quarterbacks, he probably knew nothing but success in high school. He set all these records and they won a lot of games. And then he comes in, and you could almost call it kind of a nothing to lose situation last season where, they could have lost games, but I mean, his performance, if they were as long as they were winning games, people were pretty happy with Maty Mauk, and he even did a little better than you would have expected last year. So he became sort of a little bit of a folk hero. So then what happened in the middle, I think, of the season, where suddenly he was posting these weird box score numbers that you just never see, like 20 yards passing, and the completion percentages like in the 30%. That probably would throw you for a loop if you're used to mostly success throughout your life and being sort of warmly regarded everywhere you went to. Now on your own campus, people are talking about how crappy a quarterback you are.
Right.
So there's a little bit of adversity there, but I think if you're going to be a quarterback in college, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad. You just have to deal with it, and I think he did come out of that pretty well. And it helps when you're winning games while you're doing it, because if they had lost a few games in the middle there, who knows if he does come out of it. But he did, and he's playing. I think, I wrote this afterward, but I thought they won some games in spite of him in the middle of the season. I think they kind of won that game because of him, because especially I go back to that 3rd and 7 play. He stood right there in the pocket when Trey Flowers was barreling around the edge and planted him to the point where he couldn't even see the catch.
Right.
And earlier in the year, it seemed like at the first sign of a rush, he was scooting out of there. So he hung in there, and that was, the play of the game. All right. Gary Pinkel, maybe belatedly, is getting a lot of love for the job he's done coaching this team. Last year, I think most of us would have agreed that it was the best coaching job of his career. I think people kind of forget, but before the season started, he was sort of a popular choice to be fired,
right.
Which seems weird now. But and he takes them to a 12-2 record, number 5 ranking. They were a team picked 6th in the 7-team SEC East. They finished 1st, yada, yada, yada. This year, maybe slightly higher expectations, but not great expectations. They weren't ranked at the beginning of the season. They were picked 4th in the SEC East, but here they are again. And after losing to Indiana and Georgia, to come back and do it was another impressive side of it. To you, more impressive coaching job this year than last year?
I think it is. I think, the schedule's a little easier this year than it was last year, but it's not, exorbitantly easier. They're comparable, the teams that they went up against. The talent, I think, was a little better last year, so he had a little more experience too. He had, more starts under the belt and more
better line and better receivers, definitely.
Yeah, more talent, especially on the offensive side.
Offensive line,
than he has this year. So I mean, those two things go into it, and then the fact that it's easier, I feel like, to turn around a team's fortunes when you're given an off season than when you're given a week like he had to have this year. When you're going from 5-7 to 12-2, at least you have the whole off season to kind of close the ranks and bow up and do all the cliches that coaches talk about and become a family and all that stuff. You have months to do it. This year, there was a real chance after that Georgia loss of this season just going completely off the rails, and instead they come out the next week and they just hammer Florida on the road. So I think that to me was really impressive. The fact that not only were they able to turn it around, they were able to do it, in the span of 3 practices, 4 practices, and then they haven't looked back since. And you can say they're playing bad teams down the stretch, which they kind of are. They still haven't beaten a ranked team. I'm not counting South Carolina because that was a fraud of a ranked team. But it doesn't matter. They've gotten the job done when others haven't. Georgia lost to South Carolina and Florida. Missouri just didn't have a kind of step back after that colossal failure against Georgia. And I think that's just a great job by the staff and by the players to, kind of make a very quick change in the middle of the season and completely reverse the fortunes.
If you want to make the argument that they were comparably talented with the last 4 teams in their schedule, which I think would be probably a fair argument, to win all 4 of them, you got 6% chance of doing that, and they did it. That's pretty good. The way they did it in the fourth quarter, they had a couple fourth quarter comebacks this year on the road, winning 4 SEC road games. There's just a lot of things there that are just sort of the mark of a team that's kind of in control of its emotions and not flying off the handle. There are little things here and there about Missouri that don't make you stand up and say this is a super well coached team. I mean, their special teams are pretty bad.
Their penalties. They're the most penalized team in the Pinkel era.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mind so much holding or pass interference, but the completely unforced errors are sort of large too. I mean, there's been delay of games out of timeouts and false starts out the wazoo. So there's some things there that don't scream well-coached team, but you got to look at the big picture. And to go 10-2 with this team, I think is pretty impressive. All right, facing Alabama, obviously Missouri, big underdog, 14-point underdog the last I checked to Alabama. Do you think Missouri's defense is good enough to make this a competitive, tight game in the fourth quarter to where they do have a chance to win it?
Alabama's offensive style, it seems like kind of a perfect storm of things that would be bad for Missouri. They've got kind of a pro-style, ethos, and they've been kind of built on that. And then Lane Kiffin has come in this year and added tempo to that equation, which Missouri has struggled with pro-style teams in the past, say Georgia. They struggle with tempo this year, say Indiana. And then adding to that, on top of that, they're facing the most capable quarterback they've faced all year in Blake Sims. I mean, he's going to be the best one they've faced all year. You could say Josh Dobbs has had a hot couple weeks and stuff like that going into that game. Blake Sims has been probably the best quarterback in the league this year, and Missouri just hasn't faced somebody of his caliber. So all those 3 things being said, I still think they have the ability to slow them down. Because, if you look at the teams that did the best against Alabama defensively this year, you've got Ole Miss, Mississippi State, LSU, and Arkansas. And how they were able to do that was make Blake Sims be less efficient than he was previously. Now, they did it in different ways. I think Ole Miss and LSU did it mostly with their secondary and varying up looks and kind of having ball-hawking safeties and nickelbacks and things like that. Whereas Mississippi State and Arkansas did it with their front 7, just having athletic guys that, if they didn't exactly get to Blake Sims and sack him, they at least got in his head. And I mean, this sounds exactly like what Missouri does every single game. Alabama's only given up 11 sacks this year, so it's not really like they're hemorrhaging sacks or anything like that. But Missouri had 0 sacks against Arkansas last week, and they were definitely in Brandon Allen's head. I mean, they were hitting him.
They were in his back.
Yeah, they were hitting him every other play. So I mean, even if they don't get to Blake Sims, I feel like if they can hurry him, with the front 4 and maybe blitzing Kentrell Brothers or Michael Shearer every now and then, and force him into like a 20 for 40 performance rather than 25 or 30 for 40, something like that, then they can slow this offense down. And the other thing is, when Alabama gets both of its running backs going, T.J. Yeldon and Derrick Henry, that's when they're really potent. And those 4 teams I mentioned earlier managed to only let Yeldon beat them, basically, or neither of them. And Missouri hasn't given up a 100-yard rusher since Nick Chubb, I don't think. So I mean, they're built to stop the run game too. So I think Alabama, when it gets going, can obviously put up 600 and some yards like it did against Auburn. But I think Missouri's got the tools to be able to make this a defensive game.
Yeah, as usual, I think the key is whether you can put some pressure on Sims with your front 4, which is what Missouri usually can do, because then that allows you to keep 7 guys back, which you're probably going to need to sort of let, Amari Cooper's going to get his catches, but you want to not make them 75-yard catches. You want to make them 15 and 20-yard catches. So that's a big deal. And then just make them methodically march in the field if they're going to do it. But yeah, I haven't seen much out of Missouri's defense to think that they're in any way some sort of smoke and mirrors fraudulent group that's going to fall apart. I mean, it's not really a scheme that, if they had been playing Auburn this game, I would almost have been more concerned than if they were playing Alabama, because I don't think they have any idea what to do against Auburn. But I think Alabama is more, because they're a pro-style offense, it's you kind of understand what's coming, but then you still got to stop it. But I mean, I sensed some tremendous confusion last year in the SEC championship game that I don't think ever got resolved, and I'm not sure enough off-season. I'm not sure they still know. So we'll see. Lastly, Missouri, 2 losses. We don't know what they are yet in the college football playoff rankings. They're 14th in the AP poll, I believe. Is there any way that if Missouri was to upset Alabama, they could end up amongst the 4 teams in the college football playoff?
No.
Moving on. Join us next week.
I've thought about this all sorts of different ways, and I mean, there really isn't. I mean, this will probably look stupid if they somehow do get into it, but I mean, I think Blake Topmeyer, our colleague here at the paper, tweeted out 538's link yesterday. They said they had a literally 0% chance of getting in, and I'm inclined to agree. I mean, just look at the teams in front of them. I mean, they are the 7th of 7 2-loss teams in the top 13 in the country in the USA Today poll, and that's even without Ole Miss in front of them in the AP poll. So if you look at, I mean, 4 of those teams will have lost by next week at least, because they're all in conference championship games, and in the case of Baylor and Kansas State, they're playing each other in the Big 12. So say you get those 4 out of the way, that moves Missouri up to 9th. Say Missouri beats Alabama and the committee, moves Alabama below, and that gets them up to 8th. Say TCU loses to Iowa State, and that gets them up to 7th. And then say the committee, factors out the 2 teams that are idle, Michigan State and Mississippi State, that only gets them up to 5th. So, I mean, are they going to like Missouri's resume enough to jump them over a Wisconsin team that just won the Big Ten title, jump them over a Georgia Tech team that just won the ACC? I mean, this is the napalm nuclear option, too. This is just what all the favorites lose and everything. So, I mean, it just seems extremely unlikely.
Okay, I've done some research here. Here's what I think needs to happen for Missouri to make the college football playoff. All right, first of all, Missouri obviously has to win. Okay. Florida State in the ACC championship game needs to win. Likely that will happen on the last second missed field goal by Georgia Tech, but Florida State will win. So that's one team that will be in the playoff. Oregon beats Arizona, eliminating one of the 2-loss teams in front of Missouri. Oregon also in the playoff. 2 teams now in the playoff. Baylor beats Kansas State. Baylor, therefore, becomes a team in the college football playoff because Iowa State beats TCU. Then the only other thing that would need to happen would be for Wisconsin to get involved in a horrendously ugly game with Ohio State, to where it's so bad. Ohio State's 3rd-string quarterback now has happened to be the starter. He plays terrible, so Ohio State no longer looks like a champion. Melvin Gordon suffers a high ankle sprain. It's just like a 7-6 game, so nobody wants Wisconsin-Ohio State. Then Missouri, based on beating the number 1 team in the nation, has some momentum, jumps idle 2-loss Michigan State, 2-loss Mississippi State, and what would be a 2-loss Wisconsin team. And that's how it happens. So join us next week after all that happens and we talk about Missouri's chances in playing in the college football playoff semifinals.